All right. Can everyone see the presentation? Fine.
Yeah.
Okay. No. Yes. Okay. Great. Yes, thanks to organizers for organizing this, for this opportunity. So about the project, we worked on this mostly as a part of AI safety camp, on which also like Tillman presented recently a very brief version of this. And here we have additional points and somewhat in more detail. So the topic, as you see, is AI-driven labor market impacts and the economic safety nets. And today I and Tillman will present, and the first part will be presented by Tillman. So I guess, yes, please go ahead with introducing the topic and so on. Yeah, thanks.
Yes, thanks, Arturs. Right, so by now a few more people have joined, which is nice. I think would be worth making it still fairly discussion-centered, given that there are so few participants, and leave a bit more room for discussions and questions and so on. So we try to keep it brief.
Yes.
Right. But yeah, so this is joint work with David Conrad and Arturs Kanepajs and myself, Tillman Schenk, and it's the result of, as Arturs said, the collaboration during the AI Safety Camp. And as the title suggests, so the aim of this project was broadly to get a better understanding of the macroeconomic disruptions which will be caused by artificial intelligence, and was then to suggest sort of safety nets or policies to counteract potentially harmful effects of artificial intelligence. And eventually our output consisted of 2 working papers, and this is one of them, and it takes a rather broad view. Namely, perhaps you can go to the next slide. Right, so essentially the question we focused on was how AI will affect our labor markets, and to sort of provide a range of policy suggestions to counteract potentially harmful or adverse effects of AI on work. And what we realized sort of fairly quickly is that sort of economists tend to have a very sort of diverse opinions on the labor market impacts of AI. While some economists tend to be very optimistic about AI's impact on work, others are much more skeptical. And what we eventually did in our work is not to provide sort of an additional prediction on the labor market disruptions by AI, but rather to sort of provide a framework for differentiating between different positions on the effect of AI on labor markets, and labor demand, to be more specific. And eventually sort of we distinguish between, or we found that it's useful to distinguish between 4 different scenarios of how AI might impact the demand for labor within our economies. And sort of the 4 scenarios we call the low effect AI scenario, so automation, productive synergy, and technological supremacy, or a singularity in the extreme. And building on this framework, this is what Arturs then does in the second half, is sort of to provide policy recommendations for both steering technological change towards more desirable outcomes and remedying sort of materialized undesirable scenarios, or like, make them less painful, essentially. Right, can you go to the next slide? Right, so what we did is essentially we built it on sort of an existing economic model developed by Daron Acemoglu and Pascual Restrepo. And we argue that sort of the impact which AI will have on labor demand and labor markets more generally essentially depends on 2 factors. And that's firstly net task displacement, or what we call the net task displacement effect, which is essentially concerned with how many tasks AI is going to automate or displace. And secondly, the extent to which AI will affect aggregate productivity in our economy. Right? Why do these 2 factors determine the effect of AI on labor demand? So let's start with explaining what we mean by net task displacement. So a labor displacement, or the automation of sort of existing work tasks, has a negative effect on the demand for labor. So if AI allows firms to execute tasks which were previously performed by humans with machines, then that means that firms require fewer workers to produce a given output, which means that less labor is demanded. So an example could be that sort of AI could automate the occupation of a data entry clerk, right? Someone who's entering data into databases, updating records, and so on. That's a task or an occupation that AI could automate. But we note here that sort of new technologies not only automate existing tasks, they also usually create new tasks, which can be performed by humans. So as an example, an occupation we have already seen emerging in the context of artificial intelligence is this sort of job as a prompt engineer, right? So someone who's sort of giving commands to large language models. And by net task displacement on the y-axis, what we essentially mean is sort of we refer to the effect of tasks automated by AI less the new tasks that are being created by AI, right? And then sort of aggregate productivity effect in this specific model at least sort of has a positive effect on labor demand. And that's also sort of, I mean, it makes sense in most cases because as productivity rises, firms are able to decrease the price they charge for their products. And in response, sort of households become effectively richer and increase their consumption, and more labor is necessary in production, essentially to satisfy the increased demand, right? And now what we can do sort of in this, fairly abstract conceptual framework is to, perhaps you can go to the next slide, draw sort of a 45-degree line in this diagram, which results from the origin. And now all scenarios which are above the line correspond to sort of a falling labor demand, and all scenarios below the line correspond to an increase in labor demand. And what we now do is sort of we investigate 4 scenarios on how AI could impact labor demand and labor markets more generally, right? Yeah. So if you have any questions on this, please feel free to interrupt me. That's fine. I forgot to say that. Yeah. But please, I think there's we have so few participants. That's totally fine. But okay, if there are no questions for now, maybe you can start with the first camp of economists that we have identified. Right. So the camp we call low effect AI, and it basically states that sort of AI's effect on aggregate productivity and on labor displacement are going to be low. So labor demand is relatively unchanged by sort of artificial intelligence. And that's because a low net displacement effect is sort of essentially good for the labor market, but low productivity effects are, bad. And in support, sort of many advocates have pointed to the so-called productivity paradox, sort of the fact that aggregate productivity has actually evolved fairly slowly during the last decade, despite fast advancements in AI technology, for instance, measured in the number of patents. And that is then sort of interpreted usually as being the result of the inherent limited capabilities of AI technologies and perhaps IT technologies more broadly, right? So such a position is most sort of plausible when you are essentially a skeptic about artificial intelligence and about the potential of the technology as a whole. There's a second camp of economists, which is sort of fairly related. It's called the so-so automation camp, and it sort of holds that productivity increases from AI are essentially not to be expected, but still that AI is going to displace a lot of workers. And taken together, this leads to sort of a decrease in labor demand. So that's a fairly pessimistic scenario. We should notice here that sort of a falling labor demand does not necessarily need to manifest itself in unemployment. It could also mean falling wages for sort of a large share of the population. But in any case, sort of labor's share of national income sort of is poised to fall which essentially would entail that sort of workers would lose political and economic bargaining power within our societies. And as a result, inequality and poverty are the result of such a scenario. Right, so Patrick asks, do you correct for the growth of a number of tasks in the future? Right, so by growth in the number of tasks, you essentially mean that sort of technologies can create new tasks, I assume. That's sort of what we try to capture by saying that it's a net displacement effect. So technologies always displace or automate existing tasks, but they also create new ones, right? And that's why we net sort of we sum them up against each other basically. I hope that helps in understanding.
Well, then, are you looking at in terms of like percentage done by AI versus humans? Or what I was thinking is that we have a way of just creating more work for ourselves anyway. So if we have more machines, we'll just like 1000x the number of tasks to do. And so I'm not sure how that goes into the net displacement.
Can you? I'm not entirely sure whether I understood correctly. Can you quickly repeat that point?
Yeah, so we have a way of just creating more work for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that we just create 1000 times more work. And maybe by number wise, the machines will replace more tasks than humans, but we'll just do new work. But another way to account for it is maybe relatively, is it like percentage of tasks done by AI versus by humans?
Right. So I think I'm not entirely sure why we should be able to create sort of as much new work as we can, sort of. I mean, essentially, sort of, if a firm is sort of has to decide on how to produce a given set of output that it wants to, share to consumers, then it can either decide to do it with machines, right, or with human work. And if machines turn out to be much more productive than humans, it's hard to see sort of to what extent we can, essentially create just new work tasks for humans out of the blue. But I hope I understood that correctly. But yeah, concerning sort of the relative to absolute numbers, I think essentially sort of one point that is important, I think, right, essentially we are concerned with the absolute numbers of tasks that are there to execute for humans basically in the economy, and it's not about the share of sort of tasks via the machines. Yeah, I hope that was helpful. I mean, we can also come back to it at a later stage point. Right. I think maybe we can just continue for now and come back to these questions a bit later, if that's fine with you. Right. Okay, but so right. So as I said before, sort of falling labor demand does not need to manifest itself in sort of larger unemployment, but could also mean falling wages. But in any case, sort of workers are about to lose sort of political and economic bargaining power in this scenario, and inequality and poverty are basically the results. Right. We also note that sort of due to very low productivity growth, the amount of resources which can be sort of freed up in this scenario for redistribution is fairly limited. Right. And in support, sort of, most economists who have sort of argued for such a scenario have sort of stated that so AI development is inherently biased towards sort of more automation. So many economists have pointed to sort of the Turing test as an example of nudging sort of scientists towards creating an AI which substitutes or imitates sort of for human labor. Right. So let's continue with the third camp, right, which is called we have called the productive synergy camp, which essentially believes that sort of AI is going to, and that we are going to experience large increases in productivity, but which argues that, or like economists who have argued for this scenario believe that not many workers will be displaced by AI, and as a result, sort of labor demand will increase substantially under such a scenario. And sort of the strongest argument speaking in favor of such a hypothesis is that sort of this has essentially been our experience with previous general purpose technologies. So if you think about electricity or the steam engine, they have usually boosted productivity over very long periods. And while they automated a lot of jobs, they also created many new tasks humans still had sort of a comparative advantage via machines. So that ensured that humans still had a very fundamental role in production, although so many sort of jobs and sectors experienced automation. But importantly, we note here that this does not mean that such a scenario would come without challenges. So significant reorganizations of the production process always imply structural transformation and structural changes, and they always create laggards and losers. Because the nature of work changes so dramatically, some workers and industries are likely to lose, and workers have to reallocate to new sectors, but some might be too old to do so, right. So the key challenge arising in that scenario is essentially to reduce adjustment costs for workers who have to transfer to different sectors or industries, right? And the last sort of camp that we want to talk about, we labeled the technological supremacy scenario, which is basically sort of a scenario in which AI takes over a large share of tasks currently performed by humans, but at the same time, AI significantly outperforms the human workers it replaced. And the labor market demand effects of that scenarios are actually quite ambiguous, because sort of a high net displacement effect has a downward pressure on labor demand, and a high productivity effect has an upward pressure, right? So while there are fewer tasks sort of in demand, of each of those tasks, much more labor is demanded, basically. Susan, do you want to ask a question or something? No.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no worries. And then the extreme sort of this leads to the sort of singularity scenario where machine intelligence sort of exceeds human intelligence, and economic growth basically sort of accelerates at an ever increasing pace, right? And the key policy challenge arising under such a scenario, at least from a labor market perspective, is basically income inequality, because as machines become highly productive, capital owners will experience rising returns on their investments. And since capital is distributed much more unequally within societies than labor is, such a scenario would come about with significant increases in income inequality, right? But we also note that sort of the abundance that is being created by productivity growth then allows for much more costly redistribution schemes, like UBI and so on. But Arturs will speak more on this, right? And the most decisive argument, perhaps, brought forward for this scenario is arguably sort of the idea of an intelligence explosion, sort of that AI can self-improve and thereby, expand the set of tasks which can be automated at sort of an ever-increasing pace. Okay, I think that's me for now. Right, Arturs, you want to continue?
Okay, thanks, Tilman. Yes, and I'll continue by talking about the policy implications. Maybe just a brief note. We can discuss it later also, but regarding the net displacement effect of AI, the Patrick said, in some sense, what we do actually, we refer in our research quite heavily to the work of Acemoglu and Restrepo, to their model, and they have certain ordering of tasks like this, and the ordering of tasks is such that the new tasks are actually more labor is more productive by working on those tasks. So these are actually tasks that are worked on by humans, and like they have a specific model that they use. But we talk in our work about these issues more generally. So that's sort of intuition you may have with respect to what is happening in the common economy. With respect to these to what workers do on these tasks, but we can come also later back to this discussion. Is it more useful to use a specific model, or maybe some more empirically based measure? Yeah, I'll just, in the interest of also of time, I'll just then talk about the policies that we have identified. So we also looked at a number of policies that have been put out there in the literature, and the policies can basically divided in two broad camps. So one camp of policies or set of policies are for directing progress. And another set of policies is for what might work under different scenarios. So I'll talk about both these sets in turn. So first of all, what can do to direct progress in one direction or the other. And more specifically, like technocratic approach, what to do to direct innovation. And I'll mention three main points. So first of all, subsidies for development of AI that is expected to augment labor. And one example is teacher assistants that really do not replace teachers, but help them in their work to be more effective. And of course, there are big question marks like what exact what effects will some specific models, some specific AI solutions have. And that's an active area of research. And now the second set of policies are taxes on AI that automates labor or can be expected to automate labor. One example is robot taxes. And this set of policies also have their own solutions, and I will come back to robot taxes later. But in principle, if you do expect that solutions that you will automate away labor will have higher tax rates that can incentivize research perhaps in other directions. And third, well, it is key to learn about the impacts and risks of new AI solutions. So what has been suggested is to for companies to research augmentation and automation potential, to assess this potential for the AI solutions, and that is now currently proposed as a possible research direction, but of course could also be mandated by government. And second way to learn about the effects of AI solutions is to just deployment and observations in the real world. And one approach that can balance benefits and risks is gradual deployment and regulatory sandboxes. So gradual deployment within firm, maybe gradually across industries. First to industries which have the lowest risks of negative effects, or maybe also some randomization at those geographic areas are some ideas that are out there. That was first point on the directing progress. Second and quite general point is that currently powerful corporations decide on innovations with little input from affected workers, and that is quite a general problem. And one example how that may be changed, and what Johnson and Asimoglu put out and described in more detail in the recent book, is green tech, like path to green tech, and just point out the steps here. It's first, civil society raises awareness through inconvenient truth, and maybe like the movie, and which describe the challenges of climate change, and also through actions of other groups like Greenpeace. So first of all, it's awareness, raising awareness. Then what follows can be civil discontent and strikes, and eventually changes in political balance that can then result in new laws and standards, and new technology, and eventually different decisions are made by the corporates. For instance, more investments in green technologies, and what we see now is much cheaper solar batteries. Actually, the progress was there you could already observe the trajectory quite a while ago, but yeah, further investments have proceeded, and now like the situation with green tech is much better than maybe a few decades ago. And also how AI can help is strengthen supportive collective decision-making technologies. There are some good examples, for instance, in Taiwan that can help overcome the collective action problems by allowing people to engage, helping people to engage, attaching their attention to decision-making and making involvement more easier in making decisions on what technology solutions to develop. And also, third, related collection of actions is supporting unions and antitrust, and how here, as Tilman briefly remarked, frontier AI supply chain has a tendency towards concentration, so towards natural monopolies, as we know, like these fabs, semiconductor manufacturing plants, for instance, they require investments in billions and even tens of billions. Concentration is very prominent here all across the supply chain, and antitrust laws are very applicable here, as already has been recognized in the literature, but perhaps these laws are underused at the moment. Also, strengthening labor unions can provide additional balance to the power, and final point here is open sourcing, and also, of course, limit the concentration of power. But then again, as many people here know, I presume, know about the challenges of this AI safety challenges that open sourcing can pose. Recalls and monitoring of use are more different, more difficult here. But this limiting concentration of power, I think, is one key argument that open sourcing proponents are putting out. Okay, that was covered like how to change direction of technological development, and now I'll talk about policies under different scenarios. And it is important to cover the policies under different scenarios, even if we are not here and not yet at those scenarios, for two key reasons. One is feasible policies are important to know to understand the whole picture. So just on an abstract level, if we have a scenario with many challenges, but then there are also we already can now recognize good policies under that scenarios, taking these things together. Maybe that is actually quite desirable scenario. So we might want to steer towards that one instead of maybe some other scenario with the policy interventions. And another reason is that there are preparations can be made ahead of time. For instance, as Tilman already mentioned, universal basic income, it could be useful to already set up infrastructure and maybe make small payments right now if we would expect in future to become more attractive to increase the sums. So yeah, this can already provide some basis for expanded coverage. So these are two reasons to talk about what are the policies under these scenarios. So first of all, what we focus on the least is low effect AI, and this is basically a situation when much of AI discussion has turned out to be hype. Effect of AI has plateaued in some areas. What we hear, that there are signs towards that, but yeah, there is an ongoing discussion. But overall, under such outcome, we would not expect major shifts in policy recommendations compared to status quo. But one thing to say is that there is less uncertainty regarding returns of from education. So long-term investments in human capital could still be expected to have quite high returns. Contrast that to to the current situation when I guess I have heard concerns, and maybe many of you have heard concerns from people who are just starting studies in their universities. Like what should I learn, because many things will get automated away soon anyway. So uncertainty regarding that will have subsided, and I guess this is just the general recommendation that value of long-term investments in education they could still remain. So let's now proceed to the next set of scenarios. So social automation, and a key policy here is increased taxes on automation, like these robot taxes, and two key benefits are increased income. So as Tilman already mentioned, like the challenge here is basically that there is not much money to go around. So some money could become available to help those, for instance, who have been displaced from work, who have faced lower wages or have been let go. And also this something like a robot tax could slow automation. Key problem here that it is difficult to draw the line between labor automating and other tech. For instance, what is a robot and what is a machine? Where exactly is the line between one and the other? What automates labor, but what augments labor of some workers? It's very difficult to draw the line, and that is actually where discussion about robot taxes came to when the question was raised a few years ago. But still, in principle, this is a debatable question, and it might be possible to resolve this question, especially when the issue becomes very pressing under the described situation of social automation. Next set of policies could be employment incentives, and in particular lowering or even making negative taxes on labor income. And the advantages and challenges are somewhat opposite to the robot taxes here. So on one hand, like it's quite common to apply income taxes to labor already. Governments know how to do it. Negative labor taxes might be more challenging, like subsidies to labor, but still something that's quite feasible. The problem here is that under social automation, the income to government has already declined, and of course, refusing other income sources is may still exacerbate the problems that there is not enough funds to go to supporting those most in need. Next, strengthen civil society and labor unions. Still similar advantages, similar points that I already covered in general. Next, job guarantee schemes. Again, I would say this again, expanding these policies broadly is quite challenging because there is not so much money to go around. But again, for those most in need, who have really suffered quite much because they have been their purpose, their meaning has been tied to their work. Policies like these could be considered either government jobs directly, or subsidies to already existing jobs that would not pay enough with government subsidies. And finally, gradual deployment and regulatory sandboxes I already mentioned. In general, these would allow learning more, and not only about potentially threatening technologies, but also about technologies that might have productivity improving potential for labor. So potentially augmenting labor augmenting technologies, but we would expect society to be quite skeptical against any kinds of technologies under this scenario, but at least measures like these could allow balancing cost and benefits of technologies, and allow the technologies to prove themselves before widespread deployment. So yeah, these were two scenarios. The third one, productive synergy. So the main problems here is growing inequality between workers and frictional unemployment. So growing inequality, some workers are quicker to transition to adopt the augmenting technologies than others, and frictional unemployment is just because there is so much change, so quick change. Many people, many workers are in between jobs, and the suggested policies here are conducting lifelong and regular skills assessments to identify those workers which might benefit from new technologies that augment their work or maybe transfer jobs. Just do a whole different job, and also policies for workers transitioning from automated roles. And for them, support could be provided in the form of income assistance, unemployment benefits, as there are already, and also the coverage could be expanded. Retraining services provided directly or subsidized from government, and also job placement services. Yes, and three scenarios closer to what we see today, and maybe the fourth, more exotic scenario is technological supremacy. And here we come to the income guarantees like universal basic income. And so why is universal basic income probably not a feasible policy today? Two most important arguments is that it might disincentivize work, and also that there is just not enough money to go around to introduce a universal basic income of meaningful size. So it would be quite expensive to introduce these policies today. Under technological supremacy, these two considerations are no longer such a pressing problem. So there is much more money. Economic growth has also increased, and disincentivizing labor is not really an issue because much of labor has or can be automated away anyway. So and there are additional arguments why universal income could be beneficial, like it could foster democracy through lower income inequality, and there is some correlation between economic power of people and also their political power. But UBI could also be seen, and indeed is by some, as a defeatist idea that can disempower workers. So workers have lost their key bargaining chip, which is basically ability to go on strikes and stop the economic machine from working for individual companies and the economy more broadly. So, well, maybe in short term they might prefer receiving income instead of working for the income. It's actually quite fragile. It could be quite fragile situation, some have argued. The debate is actually still ongoing regarding that, as you might imagine. Some also related policies that have been proposed are wealth distribution, so perhaps putting some set percentage on wealth in many of its forms, and perhaps redistributing also wealth at some point of people's lives. So Piketty et al. Have proposed giving tens of thousands of dollars at the age of 25, and some other proposals have been proposed, have been put out as well. One other idea is universal basic capital in the form of giving people ownership of shares of of the largest companies in the economy, so everyone can basically benefit from economic growth. Yes, what is in common for these policies? They basically redistribute income, redistribute capital, the fruits of the fruits of the growth of the economy. Yeah, because there's just more money to go around, other solutions like job guarantees become feasible for people who really do not want to give up their work because they derive meaning. So yeah, it's quite possible for governments to subsidize or provide such solutions as well. What is key here is also key for all kinds of income taxation solutions is international coordination or international cooperation to avoid capital flight to jurisdictions that really that do not tax the capital so heavily. Quite important here are antitrust policies, as mentioned before. There is tendency for concentration in the AI supply chains. So to limit this power concentration, antitrust policies would be key. And also what has been raised is nationalization of the frontier AI and also because of AI safety risks that could be addressed only in this way more efficiently. I will not like expand much more on this here. And putting the frontier and AI in government's hands might also help addressing these income redistribution questions and power imbalance questions more directly. But of course, as we know, there are big drawbacks of government taking over companies and government managing companies. So yeah, but at one point, the costs and benefits might shift. All right. Yeah, that essentially covers the main points we wanted to present to you. Here I'll just briefly recap the main scenarios and one policy under each scenario. Just briefly, what came up quite often was the currently existing power imbalance. So to direct technologies in a socially beneficial way, it could be useful to strengthen civic society unions and introduce antitrust policies to get inputs from wider society on directions of technology. Possible outcomes is low effect AI, and under that, continuing investments in education is key. Another possible scenario is also automation. Under that, robot taxes offer much promise. Another scenario, productive synergy. So here, support to workers in transition through unemployment insurance, retraining, and placement assistance is useful. And finally, technological supremacy provides some arguments, especially compared to the current situation, to income redistribution in the form of universal basic income or some other solutions. Yeah, that is basically the main point we wanted to cover here. This covers the main points. So, Tilman, do you have something to add at this point, or yeah, just let's invite more questions from everyone who has joined.
I think it's good if we open now a bit for questions and which I'm sure came up. Yeah, Patrick, go ahead.